What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Token Tuesdays. This week we'll be talking about Stellar Lumens, and you know what's so exciting about Stellar Lumens? Its logo is a rocket, and if you haven't guessed it yet, that means it's on a moon mission. Okay, even in a bear market, Stellar has been performing outstandingly. You know why? Because it's a rocket, and if you see the rocket behind me, and you see the rocket in the logo, that's how you know. Okay, this is just a reminder that this is not financial advice and it's not a recommendation to buy, and always do your own research. So let's get into it. What is Stellar? So the Stellar Network is an open source, decentralized financial services platform that connects banks, financial institutions, payment networks, and people all around the world. Its vision is to make money sending internationally as cheap and easy as sending an email. So it's run by the Stellar Foundation. It's a non-profit organization that contributes to the development of tools and social good initiatives. So if you think about maybe the SDK or the DEX that they are coming up with, basically that's all done by the Stellar team. So it was founded in 2014 by Jed McCaleb and Joyce Kim, and currently Jed is the only one that's still at the project. And it was actually created from a source code fork of the Ripple protocol. So it was actually using the Ripple consensus algorithm, but it has since ported over to the Stellar consensus protocol consensus mechanism. I'll be explaining more on that later. So basically, it uses a native crypto asset called XLM. So that's where the name comes from. It's actually not Stellar Lumen tokens, but it's more it's actually just called Lumens. And basically, it's used in the network as a form of to burn as transaction costs, and as well as to prevent spam on the network. So the Lumen is a unit of digital currency that's native to the Stellar network, and actually 100 billion Stellars were generated at the launch of the Stellar network in 2014. But after switching from the Ripple protocol to the Stellar network, it actually changed its unit of currency from the Stellar to the Lumen, and that was in November 2015. So the Lumens have two use cases. The first one is anti-spam. So if you think about maybe Gas or Ethereum or another protocol layer, basically it prevents people from faking transactions on the network and wasting Lumens in terms of fees. The second use case is to facilitate multi-currency transactions. So the Lumens is something like a bridge between two currencies. For example, if I want to swap Singapore dollar to US dollar, and just for example's sake, if there's no direct liquid pairing, I'll go from Sing dollars to Lumens and Lumens to USD, assuming that both currency pairs have a liquid market. So it's kind of a bridge currency, and it helps to maintain the flow of liquidity within the Stellar network. So actually, the thing about Stellar that's really quite amazed me was that there are very low transaction costs when using the Stellar network, and that's actually because it's already pre-mined. Like I said before, 100 billion lumens now were generated at the start of the network, and that means that you don't need to pay miners in terms of block discovery fees or whatever. So it's actually very cheap. And as you can see, the transaction cost is fixed at 0.0001 XLM per transaction. So at the current price, Stellar is about 30 cents USD, and actually 0.0001 XLM is it's not even 1 cent. So how can this be allowed, man? Look at the uncle. So the next thing I want to introduce to you guys is the consensus protocol. So like I said before, it's very low because there are no miners to compensate for securing the network. And the protocol that they used at first, like I said before, was a practical Byzantine fault tolerance consensus, which is what Ripple, Neo, Tendermint uses. But it has since transitioned over to the Stellar consensus protocol, which is a type of federated Byzantine agreement. And because of the fact that you don't need to pay miners or something, the block confirmation time is actually really quick. It's about 3 to 5 seconds on average, and the network can support up to 4,000 transactions per second. I've heard that it can go up to about 8,000 transactions per second, but a fair measurement on a daily basis is about 4,000 transactions per second. Okay, so moving on, now we'll be talking about the Stellar consensus protocol. it's an open membership kind of consensus mechanism. So if you think about it in a way like how if you start up your computer and you start running a Bitcoin node, you can jump onto the network at any time and lend your computing power to secure the network. Stellar is very similar in this way, as in you can join consensus at any time and leave at any time. So actually, it works on kind of a gossip protocol, which is something that directed acyclic graphs like Hashgraph uses. And the way that this is done is via quorum slices. So for example, if I run my node and I connect to the Stellar network and I decide to trust Andy and Mike with the transaction. So basically, this will be considered a quorum slice. And basically, everyone has their own quorum slice. So if Andy decides to trust Ryan and Mike, basically these two quorum slices will overlap and form a quorum. So if you look at the diagram on the side of the slide, you can see that quorum slices join together and they'll form this thing called a quorum intersection. And basically the transactions that each node or each quorum slice agrees on is the consensus mechanism. And basically this is how consensus is formed. And basically every time transactions are conducted on this network, the transaction fees in XLM are added to an inflation pool. And basically at the end of every week, anyone can vote on the top validators of the network, and these people will receive 0.05% of the total XLM in transaction fees for the week. So this is how the inflation works in the network. And every year, the inflation rate is pegged to 1% of the current Stellar Lumens market capitalization. So the drawback of this consensus mechanism is that because there's no incentive for validators to validate the transactions on the network, and there's no incentive for anyone to run a node to secure the network, it leads to a greater amount of centralization. So currently there's only about 100 nodes on the network because of the fact that people are not economically incentivized to secure the network as it is in Bitcoin or something like Ethereum. So Stellar is used for cross-border transactions and payment. But how is money sent using the Stellar network? So for example, we have Mike, a man from China, who wants to trade his Chinese yuan for US dollars. And he will go through Valerie, who is actually, say, a network anchor in America. So actually, the concept of a network anchor is quite easy to understand. They are essentially bridges or gateways between existing assets and the Stellar network. And this means that if I devote myself to being an anchor, I will add an extra asset or a different type of asset onto the network. So for example, this person called Valerie from America decides to add her US dollars into the network. So the more anchors that you have a more diverse set of assets that can be provided within the network. So for example, instead of changing his Chinese yuan to US dollars, if he wants maybe a South African rand, and there's a network anchor that supports this asset, South African rand in the network, he's able to make that swap directly, provided that there's sufficient liquidity. So actually how transactions are conducted on the network. For example, if Mike wants the US dollars, but there isn't a completely liquid pairing between the Chinese yuan and the US dollars, the transaction will be posted onto the Stellar decentralized exchange, and actually they'll go through this thing called cross-asset payments. So as you can see from the diagram below, instead of transacting directly from Chinese yuan to US dollars, it might actually go through a longer process. For example, from Chinese yuan to Singapore dollars, to Great Britain pounds, and then to Litecoin or Bitcoin and Japanese yen, and eventually to US dollars. So if there's no purely liquid pairing that can take the amount that he wants to transact, you'll go through this thing called hops. And these hops are actually atomic, so which means you will either fully succeed or fully fail. And it makes sure that you're not left with an unwanted intermediary asset like Great Britain pounds or something. And actually, the decentralized exchange will facilitate everything and find the best pathway of payment. And this process is known as pathfinding. So actually, the Stellar org team has actually come up with their own decentralized exchange called the StellarDEX. There are multiple DEXs, but the official one is stellarterm.org. And actually, the DEX is very interesting because it's not like a traditional DEX where you don't have an order book. the DEX actually has an order book. You're able to post stuff on your order book. So if you look at the diagram on your left, the picture, you'll see that it actually functions in a way very similar to a very centralized exchange. And you can actually see the order book and the strength of each pairing. The next feature about the StellarDEX is that there are passive offers. So it means that you can actually set two orders that technically will fill each other. In a sense, okay, I'll give you an example. So for example, you want to buy one Stellar for Bitcoin at for example 0.1 BTC, and you want to also sell Stellar for BTC at 0.1. Technically you won't be able to do this on a centralized exchange because they would fill each other. But with the StellarDEX and with this feature known as passive offers, they won't actually fill each other, and you can kind of market make both sides of the order book. The next feature of the StellarDEX is that there's a preferred currency. So it kind of means that you can hold any asset that you want to hold. So for example, if you want to transact between Stellar and Bitcoin, and it goes through the cross payment asset payment channel in terms of hops and atomic swaps, you can actually have whatever change you have in case the order doesn't fill, you can actually have that change in a preferred currency. So it actually provides you with a lot of different liquid pairings, and you don't have to hold any unwanted asset. So the strength of the network is based on how many network anchors and the different types of assets that you can provide for liquidity. So we take a look at the current network anchors on the Stellar network, and this is from the Stellar website itself. You can see that Pundi X is actually providing Indonesian rupiah pairings, and stuff like Ripple Fox is providing Chinese yuan liquidity. Lalawo is providing Sing dollar liquidity. So it's actually very comprehensive. You can even use this to transact forex if you need different types of currency and not just cryptocurrencies. So actually, Stellar isn't just a form of cross-border payment provider. It's also an ICO platform, and it's a whole architecture behind it. So one of the most famous ICOs that has used Stellar as an ICO platform is Mobius. So you can check it out. But basically, what I want to bring to your attention is that Stellar is also a very ideal ICO platform. Because of the DEX, your ICO tokens can list directly onto the exchange without having to wait for third-party exchanges like Binance or Bitmex or something to list your tokens. You can list it directly on the StellarDEX, and people are able to get liquidity straight away. So the next point is that there's no gas wars. So because Stellar can accommodate such a high transaction per second, not like Ethereum, everyone will be able to get their ICO tokens in time, and you can contribute to the ICO quite easily. So there are no gas wars in this, and it's not going to be like the phantom ICO where someone paid like 40 Ether in gas to take part in the ICO. It's also very secure. Stellar is not a Turing complete system, which means it doesn't accept every programming language for building smart contracts. But that also means that it is less exploitable through these smart contracts. If you think of what happened in Bangkok, the Bangkok hack, the attack vector was through a smart contract. So it's very ideal for applications that don't require the full generality of Turing complete smart contracts. And actually, most ICOs are like that. So the last feature is that just because your ICO is on the Stellar platform, you don't necessarily have to use XLM tokens to take part. You can actually use BTC or Ethereum. So it's actually quite flexible in that sense. So actually, it's a very good ICO platform because it kind of takes the best of both of most ICO platforms, and you don't have the congestion of the network. Okay, so now we move on to the Stellar team. So as you can see, Jed McCaleb, he's the lead developer and the founder of Stellar Lumens. He was also the founder of eDonkey, Mt. Gox, and actually Ripple. So that's why Stellar used the Ripple consensus protocol as its consensus algorithm at the start, because he developed it when he was at Ripple. So we also have Nicholas Berry, who's the CTO, and David Maziras, who's the chief scientist. So what's actually very interesting that I find really good about the Stellar team is that they have a dedicated sub-team that is just purely dedicated to looking for partnerships in terms of network anchors. So it's kind of, this list is not exhaustive, but there's quite a few of them who are basically looking for network anchors in different geographic locations. So we have basically team members that are focusing on the China region, Europe, Southeast Asia. It's really good because the strength of the network is based on what kind of assets you can provide on liquidity pairings, and partnerships are the way to do that. They also have a very dedicated team of developers who are full time, and that's why I feel that this project it's really looking at the long run, and it's not just a project that kind of just ICO'd and disappeared after a while. So now we look at the team of advisors. Honestly, I don't really have much to say about it, but you can pause the video and take a look. Some of the more notable names are Patrick Collison, is the CEO of Stripe, and Stripe is one of those network anchors, and they provide a lot of liquidity to the network. The next most notable one will probably be Dan Kaminsky. He's quite famous in the cryptocurrency scene. So if you want to use this as a reference, you can just pause the video and take a look at all the different advisors. So now we take a look at the partnerships that Stellar Lumens has. So if you take a look at all these logos, all of them are either using Stellar Lumens and XLM for cross-border payment solutions, or in the case of Deloitte and Tempo, you're using it more for timestamping of the supply chain. So something very similar to what projects like VeChain, Huobi are doing. It's kind of to provide transparency to the supply chain. And some of them are also network anchors or third-party liquidity providers. These kind of asset issuers also provide strength to the network. So if you remember Ripple Fox or ICICI Bank, which is basically a liquidity provider that provides exposure to the India market. So lastly, we're going to take a look at the comparison between Stellar Lumens and Ripple, or the XRP token versus the XLM token. So like I said before, Stellar Lumens uses its own form of consensus algorithm called the Stellar Consensus Protocol, which is a form of federated Byzantine agreement. And you compare this to what Ripple uses, which is a practical Byzantine fault tolerance consensus algorithm, which they developed themselves, called the Ripple Protocol Consensus Algorithm. So actually, Stellar Lumens, the consensus algorithm that they use is kind of it kind of promotes kind of you kind of have to secure the network out of your own goodwill instead of for economic incentive. Whereas in the Ripple consensus algorithm, you kind of do it for getting back transaction fees. And people argue that the Stellar Consensus Protocol is more centralized because of the fact that people don't necessarily need to secure the network. But this is, then again, it's an open membership system. So eventually, if you have liquidity providers or asset providers or basically these network anchors that are kind of secure the network out of their own good because they are partnered with XLM, you kind of have a much stronger base of nodes as compared to something like Ripple or Neo, where all the nodes are chosen by the founding team itself because of the fact that you need to permission these nodes to be the main validators in your network. So I'm not sure how many XRP or Ripple has, but in the case of something like Neo, where you only have like 21 validators, it's a much more centralized model, and it can't scale like how XRM can if more nodes start securing the network on their own. XLM token is also inflationary because of the fact that every year is set to have a 1% inflation rate over the 100 billion that were minted at the start. While Ripple is a deflationary currency in the sense that XRP tokens are burned every time you use a transaction, something similar to what PundiX is doing with their MPXS token. So the reason why people started comparing Stellar Lumens to Ripple is actually because of the fact that they both aim to solve cross-border payments. And what I like more about Stellar Lumens is actually that they target retail users. So the average Joe like me can kind of just go onto the StellarDEX and use it for transactions without actually necessarily knowing that I'll be using XLM tokens in the transaction, like how I was kind of showing that you can have hops between different assets. So it's actually a much more inclusive system. Anyone can kind of just jump on and use the StellarDEX for providing liquidity to other currencies. And this is compared to something like XRP or Ripple, which is very centralized, and because they only trust a few validators, because it's more focused towards banks and financial institutions, so they can't necessarily put their faith in the public to provide this distributed trust, so they keep it much more centralized. And this is actually because they target banks and financial institutions, which actually is a kind of industry that requires a lot of security. So we've come to the end of our presentation. I hope that you liked Stellar Lumens and that you're as excited about it as I am. It's actually a really good project. As you can see that good projects don't really lose much value in bear markets because there are always big smart money kind of holding the project up. And Stellar Lumens is one of these projects that actually caught my eye in the first place because of the fact that it has been more or less going up quite steadily even in the bear market. So I started off looking at it from that point of view, and I started looking into the project, and I realized that the kind of fundamentals that the project has is actually really, really strong, and it's actually a much more viable platform for ICOs than I thought, because of the fact that you kind of support other currencies for fundraising and not just XLM. So that's why I feel like Stellar is a very it's a very comprehensive project actually, and it can only be set to grow because as you have more different types of assets, diverse assets on the network, different network anchors as well as different ICOs. I don't see why this project won't be here in the long run. So we come to the end of our presentation. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you like our content, and hit the notification bell for more updates. Thank you very much.